We have this misperception that like the lone inventor, right? The person who...
the lone creative, the tortured artist.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Who somehow produced the work or the invention that's therefore changed the world. It's almost never that way.
Welcome to The Lisa Show, where we take a good look at life. Hey, it's Lisa, and this is The Lisa Show. And before we jump in, I just have to get something off my chest because it's kind of weirding me out. And I'm being serious about this, and I'm kind of laughing, but I'm also kind of afraid. Every morning, I get into my car named Delilah, and for the last 2 weeks, so longer than a week, I get in and she starts playing automatically meditation music. Now, I don't listen to meditation music at all. I mean, I meditate and stuff, but I do it on my own or I do it on an app or whatever, and it is not connected to my phone or my car. So I get in and it plays meditation music, and I don't know where it comes from. And so I've been doing an experiment where like the night before I'll be listening to a mix usually that I have of 80s music or like Radiohead or something like that. And so I will look and say, okay, I'm going to just leave it on this mix. And then no matter what, I get up in the morning and she has put on this really eerie, very quiet meditation music. And I'm feeling like she's signaling me out and telling me I need to relax or something. And it's really bothering me. I've asked my kids about it. They can't explain it. I don't know what's happening. So I'm gonna, it's really weird and it's so bizarre. Anyway, I'm gonna put it on Instagram so you can see what I mean. Help me figure this out, or at least tell me I'm not alone or I'm not crazy. Okay, now while we're talking about Instagram, Corey, you left this comment and I thought it was really funny, and so I had to share. You said, "We've been parenting since 1997 and I have cooked dinner each night for most of them. What is important to me? Number 1, to have a plan. Number 2, cook food that I, myself, actually want to eat. Number 3, to play a Disney musical each evening on the kitchen TV while I make dinner. You'd be amazed at how watching Encanto for the 400th time keeps people out of my kitchen." I thought that was really, really funny. So thank you for that. It's actually really genius. You know, my kids are teenagers, baby adults and everything, and somehow I still feel like there's a case for this, you know, that I could use this. So really, honestly, thank you for sharing. Okay, let's do it. Welcome back to our Doing Good Better series. Now, if you listened to episode 1, you might remember we promised the story of an ordinary person you've never heard of who saved millions of lives. Now, you're going to hear that story in just a moment. But to recap, last episode we covered why, despite all the chaos and devastating world events, it really is possible to make an impact. But if I were to ask you, how much good you thought you would do in your community, in the world, if you had to estimate the impact you'll make in a lifetime, what would you say? Believing that it's possible to make a difference in the world, that there is hope, is the first step. But so often it feels like there's an asterisk on that thought. Sure, it might be possible to make a difference in the world if, fill in the blank, if you had extra time on your hands, if you had a lot of money you could donate, if you had the next grand idea that will cure the common cold or introduce world peace, if. Now, at a glance, it can feel like the people who make a difference are limited to a few categories: the wealthy, the powerful, the genius, or the exceptionally brave. And most of us don't identify with that, the hero stereotype. If you find yourself thinking, okay, so making an impact is possible for some people, but I'm just an ordinary person, what can I do to change the world? This episode is for you. And for me, because I get it too. So to put this story in context, let me tell you about one of my kids. If you have kids, especially young ones, you know that they are germ magnets. They sneeze liberally, they touch everything and then their face, and anything they can see and reach will somehow end up in their mouths. Well, I had one from the time he could walk would just take off, sprinting towards any puddle he saw so that he could roll around in it, of course. And I mean any puddle of mud, pothole, sinkhole, turn your back at a party, and you'd find him bathing in the slush at the bottom of the drink cooler. Literally, that's what I mean. And today, This is my healthiest kid. And I'm so relieved for all of that his immune system seems to be better off and not worse. But back then, every time I chased him, hopefully not into the road, but at least into the puddle, and frequently out of the mud, repeatedly, I felt this pang of anxiety. He's going to get sick this time. Oh, this is the one. Oh, he's going to catch an amoeba or a new strain of tetanus no one's ever heard of. How much backyard soil can you safely ingest? And that's what it is to be a parent. I mean, part of you will always worry, but that worry looks a lot different for parents today than it did 75 years ago. And that's where our story starts. In 1949, if your child woke up with a fever or a headache or even just the symptoms of a cold, you started to worry. It could be innocent, really just a cold or the flu or a 24-hour bug, but it could also be a disease that was killing and debilitating tens of thousands of people every year and which viciously targeted children. It could spread quietly from person to person, but also through water, so the wrong puddle in a public place could literally be deadly. If you were a parent in 1949 and your toddler's forehead felt warm, you were already picturing what came next. They'd start showing signs of fatigue until they were too tired to move. Then came aches and muscle pains, which could turn into paralysis. And then they'd start struggling to breathe. And in some cases, not even the best medical interventions of the time, the iron lung, could save them from suffocating. This was the reality for millions of people before the polio vaccine. According to the World Health Organization, by the time the vaccine was finally discovered, polio was paralyzing and killing over 500,000 people worldwide every single year, most of them children under the age of 5. And of course, you probably know how this story ends. Today, the disease has been virtually eradicated in places where people have access to the vaccine. But that vaccine, which has saved tens of millions of people, may have never even existed if it weren't for many, quote-unquote, ordinary people who worked together to make it possible. Erin Miller, who was walking us through Loving a Problem last episode, and who is also the Associate Managing Director of the Ballard Center for Social Impact, he took us behind the scenes in that story.
Jonas Salk gets the credit for inventing the cure to polio, which he certainly deserves a mountain of praise for, but it also wasn't just him.
Right.
And there were a lot of other key people in what led to the cure for polio. And one of my favorite examples of this is a guy named Basil O'Connor, who, in my opinion, deserves the most credit for curing polio, more than Jonas Salk or Arthur Sabin or any of the other scientists who developed the technology behind the vaccines. Basil O'Connor was best friends with Franklin Roosevelt, President Roosevelt. And when FDR got polio, Basil O'Connor turned it into his life's mission to cure it.
Okay, I'm going to pause it right here. So Basil O'Connor was not an activist or a doctor or a scientist. He was a lawyer. He knew FDR because they had been lawyers at the same firm before he was elected. But for all intents and purposes, Basil O'Connor was an ordinary person. And when his friend contracted a deadly disease, he couldn't stand idly by. And this is where the story gets really interesting. Because in the moment of wanting to help his friend with what was undoubtedly a medical problem, Basil could have said, I'm going to switch my career entirely and go back to school and become a scientist and then find the cure for polio. After all, a medical problem needs a medical solution. Thank goodness he didn't think that, because if he had, he might have just assumed that he wasn't the right person who could help. But Basil knew his strengths. When President Roosevelt created the National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis, Basil O'Connor came on board to run it and do what he did best: administrate and make money, this time in the fight against polio. His approach earned the NFIP a new nickname, the March of Dimes.
He was a very successful businessman, and he pioneered new fundraising, and they did public fundraising campaigns throughout the United States at a scale that had never been done before.
This might be a little hard to picture because Basil's model of fundraising is everywhere today. But back then, he was trying something that had never been done. Rather than appealing to just wealthy donors, Basil O'Connor's campaign encouraged everyone, including school children, to send $1 to the White House for the fight against polio. 2,600,000 dimes were sent to the White House by mail, equivalent to nearly $6 million in today's money. And that cash made a huge difference in the fight against polio.
Jonas Salk got the majority of his research funding from the March of Dimes because Basil O'Connor figured out creative ways to raise all this money. He basically spent the rest of his life fighting polio, but never as a scientist, never as an inventor. He was more of like an enabler for the inventors. We think of the scientist, toiling away in the laboratory as the innovator. But what Basil O'Connor did changed history and saved who knows how many lives. And I don't think Salk would have gotten there when he did if it hadn't been for Basil O'Connor's support and dedication to the cause. We all have a role to play in creativity. We all have a place where we can help create new solutions. But we don't have to be the inventors. We can be supporters of the inventors. We all have a place that we can play in this creative process. And it also doesn't have to be at the scale of polio. It can be at the scale of, my neighbor's really struggling. I'm going to go learn some things that other people have done, and maybe I can get some good ideas from that, for example.
Everybody has a role, according to Aaron Miller, and especially in a creative process like doing good. You heard him name two of those roles. Number one, the inventor, for example, like the scientists who directly worked on the vaccine. And number two, the fundraiser, Basil O'Connor, who accidentally pioneered crowdfunding just because he was trying to help a friend in a cause that mattered to him. I don't know if there are official names for these social impact roles, but in my mind, at least, there are at least 6 categories or profiles of people who get involved. Inventors and fundraisers are just 2 of these 6 roles in the wider process of making an impact. And Aaron mentioned these roles are relevant both on a large scale, like curing disease, or a small scale, like helping a neighbor. To help break down the other 4 roles we're going to cover in this episode, I want to introduce you to Bethany Brady Spalding.
I'm Bethany Brady Spalding. I live in Richmond, Virginia, and I have a fierce belief that all of us have insights and ideas and innovations and have the opportunity to change the world. But to me, that most of all means change our corner of the world and change the community that we are living and investing and loving right at this moment.
Let me just add a few things here, because Bethany will not tell you how awesome she is, so therefore it falls on me. She has worked on public health and education initiatives in Uganda, the West Bank and Gaza, South Africa, India, Salt Lake City, Utah, and now Virginia. She's also the author of several children's books. Bethany is an extraordinary example of seeing needs in her community and rising to meet them. But she is adamant that anyone can do the same.
I think there's no ordinary people. We're all extraordinary in our own unique ways, right? And I think we all have different eyes and different things that we see and different issues that compel us and grab us and make us feel awake and alive. And that's what is life-giving, is to be able to say, like, I have ideas for making my community a better place.
Bethany is a great example of a role that we haven't talked about yet. Number 3, the idea person. And I'm going to come back to her because we haven't even really heard what she has to say yet. But first, I want to point out that if we rewind just a little bit in the polio story, there was actually an idea person we totally glossed over, and that was Franklin D. Roosevelt himself. And I know what you're thinking. Okay, Franklin D. Roosevelt is hardly an ordinary person. He was president of the United States. And yes, I know, but bear with me. Years after being paralyzed from the waist down due to polio and seeing countless other people left paralyzed by polio, FDR had the idea to start the National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis, which would become the March of Dimes, to help combat the disease. He probably couldn't have imagined then just how far this would go, but he knew someone had to do something and invited his friends to help him figure it out. And one of those was Basil O'Connor, and the rest is history. In other words, he put Basil in the right place at the right time with the idea that maybe there was more they could be doing. To this day, if you pick up a dime, you'll see Franklin D. Roosevelt's face. And this is the reason. He couldn't have done it alone, but his idea changed the world. So let me bring you back to the idea person in present company. Bethany Brady Spalding not only notices a problem, which is relatively easy. A lot of us notice problems and point them out. But she is different in that she comes up with the ideas to solve them which is a lot harder.
I feel like it's really easy to identify problems in the world. It's really easy to see what's missing, what's lacking, what's problematic. And it's really easy to complain and criticize the world for not being the way it should be. And that's a great starting point, right? It's important to see things that aren't right. But that way of living in the world can just suck your energy, suck you of creativity. And I feel like we're all called to be creative and solve problems, not just identify problems.
And Bethany gave me an example of what this means, solving problems creatively and not simply identifying them. In this case, it was a small problem in the community that Bethany noticed in a conversation with her daughter.
My daughter was in kindergarten, and she came to me and she said, Mom, our teachers, they give us so many sweets. We do math with sweets, we celebrate with sweets, we get rewarded for good behavior with sweets, and it's really great because who doesn't like sugar? But she said, I come home feeling sick. And wow, for a kindergartner to say that.
You wouldn't expect a kindergartner to be like, hey, maybe hold it up on the sweets. You're like, okay, this has gotten out of control. Yeah.
Right. But we realized, what you eat doesn't just impact your individual health, but it impacts the whole collective health of our learning environment. And so another lesson I've learned in trying to be a change maker is that, again, you don't just complain or you don't just criticize, you can get creative and come up with some ideas for solving this problem. And so we just approached our school and just said, hey, could we do something to really create a culture of wellness at our school? And so we decided to start a school garden. And over the last decade, we've cultivated this space, this beautiful outdoor classroom where we've been able to generate funds to have a school farmer. 700 students come out every week and gets their hands in the soil and learn about where food comes from and grow it and harvest it and shop it and eat it and turn it into food. And it's just been such a joy to see this space where everyone feels welcome. And instead of just like saying, it's too bad this doesn't happen, or that's really frustrating that's happening, saying like, I think we have some ideas and we can bring people together to make it possible.
There is so much I love about this example. First of all, who hasn't raised an eyebrow at something going on at school? We love our schools, we love our teachers, and unfortunately, they're terribly underfunded, underpaid, and undersupported. So of course there are going to be gaps or things we wish would change. And when Bethany encountered this situation, she brought it up in a way that didn't assign blame or even ask someone else to do something differently. Instead, she said, hey, can I help? I'd like to try to make this better. And then she enrolled other people in the cause. She invited people to share her vision and get involved. And as she pointed out to me, a lot of people are waiting for an opportunity to help.
So many people are there to help support you and want to get involved. Everyone wants to do something good, wants to contribute, wants to show up and be meaningful. So I feel like I've found a lot of joy and success in inviting people to participate. So I think don't ever worry that there won't be people to support you and to get on board and to take part in this initiative that you're starting.
This actually brings us to our fourth role in social impact, and that's the responder. People who hear about a project or a movement and say yes, and then show up and lend a helping hand, like mailing a dime to the White House or building and maintaining a community garden at school. Responders turn a vision for change into reality in a way that no idea person ever could do on their own. That's their superpower, and that is why they are the unsung heroes in every story about social change. Bethany shared another example with me of people responding to her invitation to help.
I was living in Washington, D.C., and in our church community, we had a really vibrant youth program with lots of teenage girls and boys who were remarkable, extraordinary kids, but we realized that several of them were not literate, that even at 16 years old, they couldn't read.
Wow.
With a lot of challenges in the D.C. public schools and in communities, kids had navigated the school system and still didn't have the skills they needed to thrive in life. And instead of just complaining about principals or underfunding of schools or just all of the challenges, we decided, you know what, there are a lot of young professionals in Washington, D.C. who want to make the world a better place. And so let's set up a mentoring program where all of these young professionals would love to come once a week and be connected to a youth in D.C. who needs support, who needs vision, who needs tutoring, who needs mentoring, help with their homework, just opportunities for life. And we were like, are we going to get 15 people who would be willing to do this on a weekly basis? This is going to be hard. This is a big ask. And at the end, we had 50 young professionals who wanted to engage and volunteer. I think I'm always blown away with how people respond to the invitation to get involved.
Responders don't always get recognition for showing up, but every movement needs responders to participate, to accomplish the work of many hands, and to be the boots on the ground. Going back to the March of Dimes, the first campaign was so successful that the White House was completely overwhelmed with mail. Letters and dimes everywhere. I sort of imagine it's like when Harry Potter gets the letters from Hogwarts and they're just everywhere on the chimney and through the windows. They were everywhere. We're talking about thousands of envelopes to sort through. The White House mailroom had to hire 50 additional postal clerks to sort through all the mail. Even though these clerks, who did have the tedious job of sifting through thousands of donations, are probably never going to have, plaques in their honor, they were also part of finding a vaccine for polio. And as long as we're talking about the unsung heroes in this story, there's still 2 more social impact roles to highlight. And the 5th role that I want to point out is the improver. And to be clear, I've made up all of these social impact roles. Like, I really like to know, what are you? Are you an ENFJ? What's your Myers-Briggs? What color are you? I'm a blue, thanks. I mean, it's a great way to connect with people. So again, to my made up social impact roles, the number 5 is the improver. Now, while the polio vaccine was being developed, scientists ran into a problem. They had a solution that they hoped would work, but there was no way to mass produce it or even make enough for a trial. That's where microbiologist Leone N. Farrell came in. Leone was an improver, taking an invention that already existed and making it even better. She created a new type of bottle which allowed live strains of the virus to survive a trip to where they could be manufactured into doses of the vaccine. This contribution may seem simple, but it paved the way for millions of people to receive the vaccine later. Aaron Miller pointed out the importance of improving the ideas that someone else already came up with. He gave an excellent example of this.
Like, if you look at cars they look nothing like they did when Ford was producing the Model T. Even if he gets credited for inventing the automobile, which he, again, didn't do alone, the reason cars are the way they are today is because we just had so many smart people making them 2 degrees better, right?
Right.
And so the improvers.
Improving ideas for social impact is a huge part of making the world a better place. Ideas for changing the world very rarely spring fully formed in someone's head, already perfect and ready to go. I mean, sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night thinking I have the perfect idea that's going to change the world. But I usually wake up in the morning and I look at what I wrote and it's just like a description of my dream. And it doesn't make any sense, and neither do the words. My point is, we all need improvers to help adjust and refine our ideas. In fact, as we're going to discuss in the next episode, part of falling in love with the problem is adjusting your solution when you realize your initial idea just isn't working, or maybe it is working, but it could be even better. Last but not least, the 6th role in social impact is that of the Replicator. And I know this is starting to sound a little sci-fi or WWE, the Replicator. Bear in mind also that I came up with these terms and they are not scientific, but they are useful. Because the next time I see you, I want to know, like, hey, which one are you? Are you a replicator? Or, okay, you get where I'm going. Bear with me. What happens to a good idea that works when it's implemented and keeps getting better? Well, by default, it just keeps doing that. It works and it gets better. But in order to grow or to expand its reach, to take, for example, one school community garden and turn it into 1,000 across the country, you need replicators, people who bring solutions to more places and problems that need them. Now, remember how I said earlier that polio has been virtually eradicated? Well, there are a couple of countries where it still exists, and replicators have stepped in to help bring the already existing polio vaccine to the people who still need it.
It's not quite eradicated globally. There are a couple of hard places, and those places are being tackled by really smart people who are figuring out how do we get the polio vaccine to rural Afghanistan or remote parts of Nigeria, like places where polio is kind of like hanging on and hard to beat. Because there's low trust, because you have a hard time making sure that you've seen all the children who live in the area. These are new problems to solve. These are people who are curing polio too.
Replicators are part of the cure. Since there are no one-size-fits-all solutions, it takes dedicated and creative replicators to make sure that all people can access the good that one solution provides the world. Since its invention, the polio vaccine has prevented more than 20 million cases of paralysis from polio, and the disease has been eliminated across most of the world. This feat required people from all 6 of these so-called social impact roles: idea people, fundraisers, responders, inventors, improvers, and replicators. And there really are way more people who helped bring about the polio vaccine than I could mention in this episode. And I'm sure there are more roles and ways to help. Eradicating a problem for all of humanity has been the work of generations, and it has required a huge diversity of skills and interests and ordinary people willing to work together. Maybe in thinking about these different kinds of getting involved, you thought, hey, it's me, I'm a replicator, or I know someone who is a great fundraiser. I'm going to make a little quiz, and I'm going to put it up on Instagram so that you can determine your type. Now, this may not be exactly as accurate as, say, Myers-Briggs, but we do love a good self-discovery quiz. And let me know which social impact role you see yourself in or your friends in. And who knows, maybe it will lead to connections and helping affect social impact in the future. You never know. The point is, the world needs people with all sorts of talents to pitch in, and that means we are all needed. Even if we don't have degrees in doing good, even if we're new to social impact. In fact, Erin pointed out that a lot of people who have made a difference in the world didn't start out thinking they would. It wasn't a lifelong goal.
One thing I've noticed is that historically a lot of these social innovators come at it as a second act or even a third act. They start out in life and they pursue some career path because they're sort of figuring themselves out and what their gifts and interests are. And then something in their life turns their attention and they start to develop new gifts and do new cool things.
The skills that we've gained over the course of our lives from just living life uniquely qualify us to help with the social issues we care most about. What have you become good at? What experiences have made you who you are? Maybe you've taken on a lot of leadership roles at your job and you know how to motivate others to do their best. Or maybe you're a great friend, the kind of person who shows up to help as soon as someone needs you. Maybe you're savvy with money. Maybe you've had to think outside the box every week to incentivize your kids to do their chores. Or maybe you have a knack for graphic design. Whatever our life experiences have given us, we can turn those talents towards causes we care about. For me, since I haven't found a way to turn renditions of Whitney Houston in my car into social impact yet, I really appreciate the opportunity to use this show to raise awareness for the things I care about, like caregiving, for example. At one point in my conversation with Erin, we'd been talking about money, donations, charity, and so forth, and he told me that while that's important, there's something else that matters even more.
We don't just need more money, we need more people. And what I mean by that is none of us is a superhero. None of us can go solve all the world's problems at once. In fact, I think there's a lot of comfort to take in that realization because we feel like we should be the superhero. And so we don't need the good people to be better. We just need more good people. All of us have gifts, and all of us have ways that we can improve the lives of others that are unique to us. And if more people are focused on that and thinking like, okay, what are my gifts and how can I use them to help other people, we get better outcomes. We don't need the do-gooders to be superheroes. We just need more do-gooders.
The world needs more do-gooders. The world needs more supposedly ordinary people. The world needs us. No one can change the world alone, but luckily, no one has to change the world alone. As we devote ourselves to doing good, we join with other people who bring their unique skills and stories. Together, we can make the world better in meaningful ways. I also believe that when we give our time and effort to helping our fellow humans, we work alongside God in His work. And God can turn our quote-unquote ordinary efforts into an extraordinary impact. I've seen it. I hope that you'll take the time to identify how your unique skills can be used in the field of social impact. Whatever your passion is, your talents and gifts can make a real difference in other people's lives. And if you see yourself as an ordinary person, I hope you know you are just what the world needs. And whatever cause you've fallen in love with, you can help in ways that no one else can. You don't need to be a superhero. You just need to be you.
The Lisa Show is a production of BYU Radio, hosted by Lisa Valentine Clark. This episode was produced by Avery Stoneley, along with Becca Hurley, with help from Blake Morse, Kenny Mears, McKay Menden, and Michael Combs, with music and post-production by Kip Merrill. Bethany Brady Spalding is author and social change maker, currently running a regional healthy food coalition in Richmond, Virginia. You can find her work on Amazon and follow her on Instagram at Bethany Brady Spalding. Erin Miller is the Associate Managing Director of the Ballard Center for Social Impact. You can find more about their work at marriott.byu.edu/Ballard or on Instagram at BYU Ballard Center. Also, Erin's podcast, How to Help, is available on all podcasting platforms, and we'll put a link to that in our show notes as well. If you haven't subscribed to The Lisa Show on YouTube, you can find even more content on our channel, including the Council of Moms filmed live in our studio. As always, thanks for your messages. We read them all, and thank you for listening.
We hope you're enjoying this podcast from BYU Radio. I'm Stephen Cap Perry, host of In Good Faith, an interfaith podcast committed to listening as believers of many traditions share their personal experience with the sacred and the divine. And we've just dropped our 200th episode. Why not take a moment to check out In Good Faith at byuradio.org or wherever you get your podcasts. I think you'll be inspired by our amazing guests sharing first-person accounts of the power of faith and belief on the In Good Faith podcast.